I have tried to make this video probably 10 times now, and it keeps not working out. But I am determined to make this video. So, here we are. If you're new to my channel or this video, my name is Ariana. I also go by Ari, and this is my channel, The Solution to Addiction. Today, I am sharing with you pretty much my entire life story. I'm sharing my testimony, detailed version of my testimony, because I've made a video about it before, but it was my first video. It was a little rough. So now I want to make a newer one. And I also want to make a disclaimer before I start, because I'm going to be talking about a lot of stuff. So I am going to be talking about substances, about different types of drugs. I'm going to be talking about alcohol. I'm going to be talking about mental health issues, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, self-harm, things like that. I'm going to be talking about mentioning all of those things. So if you are sensitive to those things, if you are triggered by those things, if you don't think you should watch this video because I mentioned those things, please proceed with caution. You don't have to watch the video, or if you want to, just know if you need to click off of the video, that's fine. But I want to make that very clear and a disclaimer for anybody that might be sensitive to that or that shouldn't watch it. So I'm really just going to jump straight in because it's going to take a while to explain all of this, and I want the video to not be super long. So I grew up in a Christian household. I grew up going to church. My whole childhood I was going to church or vacation Bible school or church camp or Sunday school. I was in church as a kid, and I knew about God, I knew about Jesus. And not to say that my childhood was perfect or anything, it was not perfect. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, so I have 4 younger siblings. Our house was chaotic most of the time, and I kind of put a pressure on myself to be a role model for them, but I didn't really know how to do that because I was the first kid. I was kind of the guinea pig to test out what it's like to raise a kid. And also I was just not aware of like what I needed to do or be in order to be a good sister and role model for my siblings. So all that said, my childhood was not perfect, but it was good in the sense that I had a foundation of knowing who Jesus was. So fast forward, when I was in middle school and high school, and just all throughout my childhood, I was not very good at making friends. I was not very social. I was not outgoing, and I just struggled to make friends. So when I got into high school, I started to struggle with depression and anxiety, and I started isolating myself a lot because, for one, I wasn't good at making friends, didn't really have very many friends, and 2, my family, my home life, it just made me want to be by myself most of the time. So I started isolating and started struggling really bad with depression. And then I started dealing with self-harm. And this became an addiction because I realized that like the physical pain took away the emotional pain, or didn't take it away. It distracted me from the emotional pain. So it became a coping mechanism. I also started struggling with suicidal thoughts and just really heavy depression. And during high school, I also started dating a boy that I knew for years. He was my brother's best friend. He was a neighbor kid of ours, and I knew him for a while, but we started dating more so in high school. And that relationship added to the depression and all of those struggles, anxiety and everything, because it was not a good relationship. It was a very toxic relationship, and it caused me to really have low self esteem and no confidence. I started to believe and think that I was not good enough, that I was not enough, just as a human being. And I started to believe and tell myself that there was something wrong with me, because I genuinely thought there was something wrong with me with everything that was going on in my life as a teenager. And that was whenever I was 16 or so. At that same time, I started to hang out with my brother and the guy I was dating and their best friends, their two friends. So I was hanging out with a group of guy friends that were not really the best influences. And I was also kind of vulnerable in the sense that I wanted friends. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be accepted and be included. So during that time, I did everything that they were doing. They would come over and we would drink or we would smoke weed. And this is the first time that I tried alcohol. This was the first time that I tried weed. This was the first time that I tried LSD or shrooms. And we just hung out and would do all these different things. And that's where I started to realize that, like, these different substances made me feel good, made the emotional pain go away temporarily. But and I also, like, I thought that it was good for me to fit in and to do these things with them and be included. And at that same time, I also started to push God away and not believe in God anymore. I kind of just didn't want to believe in God because I thought there couldn't possibly be a God that loves me if I was struggling with depression and anxiety and all of these heavy things. I thought there couldn't be a God that loves me. I also was influenced in my friend group with them who they didn't really believe in God, or they were atheists, or they said that they didn't believe in God. So I was like, okay, that's another way to fit in with them and be seen as cool. So I stopped believing in God. After high school, that friend group drifted away. I ended that relationship, and then once I graduated, I enlisted in the Navy, and I signed up to go to boot camp. I think I had 8 or 9 months before I would actually leave for boot camp. So during that time between high school and boot camp, I started hanging out with a group of guy friends, different guy friends, and I started dating one of them. This friend group and it kind of got even more dangerous and rebellious, I guess, than the last friend group, because these friends were more defiant, I guess, of rules. They didn't really want to finish high school. They didn't want to live in their parents' houses. And we would just smoke weed every single day and do really dumb, dangerous things. And now looking back at my life, I can see how much God was protecting me during that time, that there were so many situations that could have gone wrong, that could have been really bad, but I know that God was protecting me in that. And then on my 19th birthday, I wanted to go to an abandoned building and spray paint, because that's one of the things that we were into. That's one of the things that me and one of the guys that I started dating, one of them, and we would go and vandalize and spray paint and whatever. So I wanted to go to this abandoned building. And whenever we went, cops came and arrested us. And I had really probably the worst panic attack ever, because I totally believed that I ruined my life. I thought there was no chance of me going to the military anymore. There was no chance of me having a good life anymore because I would be going to jail. I thought my life was over. And so I was really in distress and struggling really bad when I went to jail. And we only spent 4 days in jail. Well, I spent 4 days in jail. I think the boy I was dating was like, he only was there for 2 days. But during those 4 days, as I was in jail and I was thinking myself into a spiral of just exhaustion from being from thinking that I ruined everything, I had a supernatural encounter with God. I felt the literal presence of God, knowing that it was the presence of God because I called out to him and I asked him to help me. And at that time, not believing in God, not believing that God even really existed anymore, it was absolutely life-changing. So, feeling that presence of God and knowing that God actually is real, after I got out of that jail, I wanted to start going to church. I wanted to start learning about God. But I still didn't really understand the gospel. I didn't really understand the weight of my sin and the sacrifice that Jesus made. So from there, going to boot camp, I went to boot camp 2 months later. I ended up being able to go, and I think that that was God kind of orchestrating things in that way because I technically shouldn't have been able to go, but I still went to boot camp 2 months later. And during my time in boot camp and school, I still believed in God. I still went to church. I wanted to learn about God, but I was living my life in just the way that I thought that everybody was supposed to live their life, where you party and you have fun, you hang out with friends, and you do whatever feels good, whatever's fun. But then I was also going to church and trying to learn about God. So it was kind of like I wasn't fully understanding or aware of what it meant to give my life to Jesus. So in the Navy, I got stationed in Japan. So I got stationed to go live in Japan, and I got sent to Japan, and I was on a aircraft carrier for 2 deployments throughout the year or so that I was there. And during that whole time of being on deployments and being in the Navy, I struggled really bad with depression. And I used alcohol to cope with it because everybody was drinking already. Like, that's all you do in the military, pretty much. You work and you drink, you party, you hang out with friends, and you work. And I kind of just thought that that's how you live your life for the rest of your life. And so, but I was struggling so badly with depression that I was using the alcohol to cope with that. And I was drinking more than my friends were. They didn't really know that, but I was drinking more often than I was when I was hanging out with my friends. So in the Navy, I started seeing a psychiatrist, and she recommended for me to get out of the Navy early because I was struggling so badly with depression and suicidal thoughts and things like that, that I don't even know how God did this and made it happen because you don't just get out of the military. Like, that doesn't just happen. It is so rare for anyone to break a contract for the military. When you sign a contract with the military, you've given your life to them for the next 4 years or however long you sign a contract for. But it's unheard of to break your contract and go home early and get out of the military after only being in the military for a year and a half. So I know that God allowed that to happen. God, I don't know, put things together in that way. Even though I was struggling, he used it for my good. because now I look back and going through the military and going through all of that has given me so much now in my life that has brought me to where I am. So, anyway, I'm kind of getting off topic, but I was in the military, I got out of the military. When I got out of the military, I came back home, and I don't really know what I was expecting for my life to be different. I don't know what I was thinking, that it was just going to be all happy and easy now. Because when I got home, it definitely was not easy at all. I was still struggling with depression. I was still drinking and hanging out with friends home now. And so when I was doing all of that, I was just drinking and hanging out with friends. I started dating a guy that I knew from high school, one of the friends that I hung out with in high school, and we started dating. I think we dated for maybe a month and a half, maybe like a month, and I found out I was pregnant. When I found out I was pregnant, I was absolutely terrified, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I was going to keep her. Like, that was just a set thing in my mind, that I was not going to get an abortion, even though that was an option presented to me. I just knew that I couldn't do that, that I was not going to do that, even though, you know, I knew that the relationship wasn't going to work out. I knew that that we weren't going to stay together, but I still wanted to keep my daughter, because I knew that there was a purpose for her and for having her, and there definitely was. I'm so grateful that I did choose to have her. So after I had my daughter, which during the whole pregnancy, like, me and her dad decided to co-parent, and that was a whole journey in itself. But when I had my daughter, I struggled really bad with postpartum depression and mood disorder, because it was a whole range of emotions. But she was not really an easy baby. She was very difficult. She had a lip tie, a tongue tie, and a dairy sensitivity that I didn't know about until she was 4 months. So I couldn't keep breastfeeding, and I had to switch to formula, and she had really bad colic and was crying all the time. So when I had my daughter, as she was a newborn, I struggled really bad, and things were very, very hard for a while. And once it got a little bit easier, I got the hang of it a little bit and figured out some of the issues, I was able to get my own apartment, and raising her, trying to figure out how to do life and get a job and provide for her, I struggled in general with that, and I was still drinking. I was finding any opportunity I could to drink, to be hanging out with friends and drinking, and just any opportunity that I had where somebody could babysit or that she was with her dad, I was finding some opportunity to drink. So I was still struggling with drinking. And when my daughter was around a year old, I met a guy on a Christian dating app, and I originally got this Christian dating app to just meet people over messages. Like, I just wanted to meet Christian friends, because I didn't really have like Christian friends. I had friends, and yeah, so I wanted to meet new people. So I got this Christian dating app and met this guy, and he seemed like a really great guy. He seemed very genuine. He seemed kind. And I think we met at one point, but we kind of just became friends, acquaintance friends. And then on my birthday, which it seems to be always something happening on my birthday, like when I was 19, and now this was whenever I was 22. So on my 22nd birthday, I got a call from this guy, and at this point we're friends, but I didn't really talk to him. I especially didn't talk to him over the phone. But he called me and said that he was having a really hard time, that he was not sure what to do, that he needed a place to stay or to find somebody to let him stay for a day or two until he could figure out where to go. And looking back at it, there was so much that I was so naive to, that I was just oblivious to. And it costed me. It costed me a lot. But I ended up picking up this guy, and I told him he could stay on my extra mattress until he could figure out where to go. And from the start of this relationship, because it turned into a relationship, but it wasn't really a genuine or healthy relationship at that. But when this relationship started, I had no idea the amount of manipulation and lies and just being taken advantage of and not knowing it until it was too late. So I thought I was helping this guy out. He was asking me to give him money for things, and I thought that I was being kind. I thought that I was being generous and helping him, but I was naive. I had no idea what was actually going on. And I had no idea that he was on drugs, that he was using drugs. And that's another part of it. Like, I had no idea what was actually going on until it was too late. So he was using drugs. I eventually found out, because we started dating after I don't even know how long, because like I said, it was very manipulative, and I didn't realize that he was kind of lying about things. So eventually I found out that he was doing drugs, and I told him, you can either leave and get out of here or stop doing the drugs. And at that time, I had no idea what this drug even was. I had no idea that it's not really something that you just... I didn't really know what addiction was like that, where you can stop doing the drug, but it's not really just going to go away and never come back. Well, in that sense, in that time period that it was. So, I'm kind of getting off track. I'm going to try to get back on track because I had to check to make sure it was actually still recording. But anyway, eventually this guy stopped doing the drugs, but I was still struggling with alcohol. I was still struggling with drinking anytime I got the chance to. And then after he stopped using the drug, he started drinking with me. And that became a more frequent thing of drinking more often. And then there was one time that he went and bought that drug again, and I had no idea what these pills were, and until I actually tried it and he told me about it, whatever. But these pills are not a prescription drug. Like, they're not a prescription drug that you would get from a pharmacy. They're not oxy. They're not something that's less dangerous, I guess. They're the most dangerous kind of drug that you could possibly find, because they're made in Mexico by the cartels. They're packed with fentanyl and all different kinds of drugs that you don't even know what they are until it pops up on a drug test. So, but the main drug in these pills is fentanyl, which is extremely extremely strong and very dangerous, because you can overdose with even the tiniest amount. So he brought this home, and I had already been drinking that entire day. I was already very drunk. And I was very curious. I wanted to know why he was going to get this drug, why he wanted to do these drugs so badly. And I was drunk, so I asked him if I could try it, if I could have some, because I didn't really know what it even was. And he gave me a small little bit of it, because these pills are tiny, but even a fraction of one single pill is enough to literally cause you to overdose. So and also because I was already drunk, like mixing alcohol with fentanyl, it's going to make it like 10 times stronger. So after trying just a small amount, I overdosed. And thankfully, he was smart enough to call 911 and get an ambulance. And they gave me a lot of Narcan and brought me back. And I went to the hospital for that. So I overdosed, but that didn't really stop me from continuing to do that in the future. I didn't start using and get addicted to it right away. I actually, it was like a couple weeks before I started using again, but I was still drinking. After I, got home, I was still drinking, and during that same time, CPS kind of got involved and investigating me and all of the things, and I was actually very grateful, and I thought that it was a great idea for my daughter to live with her dad and her grandma, because I didn't want her in that environment to begin with. I didn't want myself in that environment. But I didn't really have a choice to just leave. It was more complicated than that. And I wanted my daughter to be safe. And I know that that was God's way of protecting her and allowing for her safety. So she went to live with her dad and grandma. And I continued to, I guess, get introduced to this drug when he went and got it again. And then I started to do a little bit at a time, because I didn't want to overdose. So I was doing a little bit, and it continued to get more and more. And the more that I used it, the more I realized, like, you can't really stop using it without having withdrawals and getting sick. So then that made me want to keep using it even more. So during that time of kind of getting addicted to this pill, to this drug, I was also trying to get this guy to go to rehab or something so that I could break up with him, because I was kind of in the situation where I felt stuck, that I couldn't really break up with him. I couldn't really tell him to leave, because I was kind of scared for my own safety of that, because the situation just got really downhill. Like it went really downhill after that. And he started getting all different sorts of drugs, where I was using a drug, yes, but I was just doing this drug and doing like the minimal amount that I could to not get sick and to just manage. But he was kind of just going off the rails with like getting all different sorts of drugs, doing them all at the same time. So I tried to get him to go to rehab multiple times, and eventually I got him to leave and broke up with him, which was difficult, but that worked out. And then, but at the same time of that, I met a friend of his that was also using the same drug, and this guy and I started dating after that. So we started dating, and it was kind of Not a terrible relationship because he wasn't really dangerous or anything, but it was the relationship was founded on using drugs and kind of just using each other to be able to keep using. So, but that relationship was a better relationship. We were together, I think, for 2 years. And during that time, I eventually started to feel like God was actually telling me that I needed to get clean, that I needed to stop using, or he would make it to where I had to. And whenever I felt like God was saying that, I wanted to stop. I wanted to get clean and not keep using, but it was so difficult that I couldn't actually do it, especially with dating somebody else that was also using. So God did make it to where I had to, where I failed. I went and took a drug test that my daughter's dad ordered, and I failed that drug test. It came up positive for fentanyl and multiple other drugs that I had no idea I was actually ingesting, that I was actually doing with that drug. It was a big reality check, and I really realized that like I had to do something. I had to change something. So I checked myself into the VA hospital to detox and go to rehab, and that's another thing that like I know that God lined that up with me going in the military and being in the military and being a veteran. The fact that I had the ability to have veterans benefits and go to the VA hospital for detox and rehab. So I did that, and that was a huge shift because then I actually started to understand the gospel. I started to understand the weight of my sin, the damage of my sin, and the damage of my choices of going my own way, doing things how I wanted to. And I started to understand God's love and his grace and his sacrifice. So I started to actually build a relationship with God. Instead of because before this, I was learning about God. I wanted to learn about him. I was reading my Bible and going to church, learning about God. But once I went to detox and rehab, that's when I started to build a personal relationship with God, where I realized that like it's not a religion, but a personal relationship building that produces a changed life. So after that, I started building my relationship with God, and I was still dating that guy. So I was doing everything that I could to help him, to convince him to go to detox, and eventually he did. And a couple months later, he gave his life to Christ. And I know that that relationship had a purpose for that, because now since then, a few months ago, he actually passed away from addiction, from struggling with this substance that is so dangerous. And that's why I have such a huge passion to spread awareness of this. And that actually is what kind of motivated me and pushed me to start making YouTube videos about addiction, because it is so damaging in all aspects of life. And I know that relationship had a purpose of him coming to know Jesus, but he still, struggled with with that addiction. And you can still love Jesus and struggle with an addiction. And that's why I'm wanting to share everything that God's been teaching me about this, about how to be free from addiction while walking with Jesus, while loving Jesus. So, when we were still together, there was a certain point that God was telling me to break up with him because we were on different paths, that God had a different plan for him and for me separately. And now looking back at it, it's difficult to even comprehend, because one of the reasons that I was wrestling with God and that I was wondering why God wanted me to break up with him, because I was scared of him going back to drugs and something bad happening. And that that actually didn't happen the way that I was worried, that something would happen to him. That happened a year later. So it wasn't after we broke up, but it was later on. So God still had a plan with everything. So I'm kind of getting off topic with that. But now, at that point that I broke up with him, I was starting to really grow in my relationship with God, and I was starting to get very convicted about vaping. Because during this whole story, I was vaping the entire time. Like from when I was 17, when I was 18, I smoked cigarettes in the navies. From when I was 18 to 20, I smoked cigarettes, and then got into vaping, and I was vaping like for all of those years, except whenever I was pregnant. I stopped whenever I was pregnant, but then I started back after I wasn't pregnant anymore. So I was vaping this entire time, and I got very convicted of vaping, and I knew that God was telling me, like, I need to stop, because one, it wasn't good for me, but two, he wanted to give me a life. God was telling me that he wanted to give me a life that doesn't include being addicted to nicotine and vaping. So, I tried for months. I tried for at least 6 months to stop vaping, and I would try to throw it away. I would try not to get one, but I was so used to it, and it was a habit, but it was also an addiction, like the nicotine, the substance of it, but then also the habit of the action of it was also. So it was very difficult to stop, and I can sympathize and understand anyone that is struggling with an addiction to vaping or smoking. Like I said, there's been multiple addictions that God has freed me from and that I can relate to. So, when I was trying to quit vaping, I was going back and forth with God and trying to lean on God, but also wanting to do it my way. And at a certain point, I started to pray, because I would pray and ask God to help me with that. But at a certain point, I started to ask God to change my heart to hate vaping so much so that I would do anything to stop. And there were multiple aspects of this that I was able to quit vaping, and I talk about that in some of my other videos. I'm going to be talking about that in future videos, but I was able to quit vaping finally after 9 or 10 years of vaping and continuing to do that. And now I have almost 6 months with no nicotine, no vaping, and I forget that that was even a thing that I did, because it doesn't feel like something that I did at one point. but it's been 6 months now. So and also like my story is still going. Like there is more testimony that God is doing in my life currently and in the future that I know is just to show people and to help people to see that God can redeem anything, that God can transform you even if you don't even if you think that you're too far gone, even if you think you've done too much. God is literally in the business of pulling you out of whatever you're struggling with and transforming it into something good. That's literally what he does. And I want to encourage anyone that is struggling with an addiction that you are not alone in feeling what you're feeling. And it is possible to stop. It is possible to come out of that addiction with God's help. And only with his help is it actually going to permanently change. So that's pretty much my whole life story, my testimony, and it's still being written. So I don't know. There's more that God is doing, and there's more that God's doing in your life too. That he's not done. Just because when you got saved or when you started believing in Jesus, that wasn't the end. That's the beginning. That's the beginning of God working in your life and truly transforming and walking with God. So I hope that this video was helpful to anybody out there that maybe needed it or maybe found some encouragement with it. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a blessed and wonderful day.